This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Yeah, man, I gotta say, going back to that medium length hairstyle for me was a good choice. It's been so long since I've had medium to shorter length hair. I almost forgot what I looked like with it. I mean, it was an experiment the last how many years doing the shoulder length hairstyle. There were periods where I liked it. And as I've gotten older, I'm like, yeah, the Jesus look just isn't really working for me anymore, brother. I've got so many old profile pics of me with long hair. It's on my website. It's going to be such a culture shock when I look back at these old photos 10 years from now, and I'm sitting there like, wow, that was me at one point. That was a stylistic choice. Again, I didn't hate it. But looking back, I probably should have done away with it a lot sooner. I still have all my hair, though. The receding hairline hasn't kicked in yet. I figured if it didn't do it when I turned 30, I probably have at least another 10 years ahead of me. Yay for relatively strong genetics. So how's everyone doing? It's Monday. That means it's Retro Raw time here on the Five Starr Wrestling Report. And I gotta say, I dug these Raw shows a lot more when they weren't 2 hours. They still sucked when they were only 45 minutes in runtime. But at least it was 45 minutes of bad television as opposed to what it is now, which is anywhere between 70 to 90 minutes of bad television. I understand the need for having to add the extra hour in 1997, but boy, does it make the shows any easier to sit through. Especially now that I'm trying to pack in so much content over the weekend with my already hectic schedule. I got a lucky break on Friday this week with getting to leave work early because of a power outage. So when I got back to my place, it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I had a little bit of evening time to myself. Not a whole lot. But it was more than I typically get on a Friday night. So that's what's on the agenda for today. Make sure you subscribe, comment, and give the show a like. We are the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everybody needs. Here on Mondays and Fridays on YouTube and Rumble. It's been a long day for me, so I'm going to try and power through this review before I go to bed. I think I'm just going to start pre-recording everything on Saturday night, since I already need most of Sunday afternoon and evening to watch the WCW shows and to also edit the Monday shows. Man, if I try to record everything on Sunday too, it's going to be way too much. It is doable, but I'd prefer not to torture myself too much. So with that, let's jump in with the review. And I do have to admit one thing. Now that I'm going back and rewatching these Raw openings from 1997, The Raw theme that they used to play during the Monday Night War era. That shit slaps. I forgot how good that riff was. I figured I'd go ahead and try to get the review off to a positive start. Do one of those compliment sandwich deals where I say something good about the show at the beginning, bury the remainder of the program for the next 2 hours, and then come up with something moderately good to say at the end. These shows, dude, they are... Oh, again, it goes back to something I mentioned a week or two back. Now that the shows are 2 hours, there's a lot of stuff they're trying to pack in. And because you got Vinny Rue as one of the head bookers now, a lot of the stuff he's coming up with is either incredibly rushed or haphazardly thrown together. So it's the old problem of them trying to cram in like 3 hours worth of content into basically 90 minutes. When you count commercials too. Which means nothing has room to breathe because, well, it's the Crash TV era. We don't have time to let things simmer. We gotta keep the show moving. Can't give people any time to actually digest what it is the hell they're watching. Keep in mind too, this is also the go-home show to WrestleMania weekend. We will revisit that talking point. We open with the Road Warriors taking on Crush and Savio Vega. I have 2 things to note at the top of this before I mention anything about the match. There were a lot of signs in the building this week. Remember, this is the era where fan signs became a very popular demand. I mean, virtually everyone brought some kind of custom sign to the venues for these Attitude Era Raws. Some of them were quite clever. Many had a lot of insider lingo that, I mean, if you were relatively smart to the business, you could probably catch a few things. It also, I imagine, made buying a ticket to see the shows a pain in the ass. Mainly because if you were unlucky enough to have to sit behind someone with a giant sign, it made the viewing experience virtually impossible. Having your entire line of sight blocked by a giant piece of poster board. There was one particular sign that I caught, and I can't say for sure whether or not this is intentional. Somebody wrote the initials WWF, but the W's, for lack of better terms, looked like they were shaped to be giant boobies. I'm not implying anything, but hypothetically, if somebody were to do something like that, I would not have put it past the fans of this particular generation. To say the fans of the Attitude Era were cultured, a little bit of a stretch. Second thing to mention, the commentator said that Farouk and Ahmed Johnson were banned from ringside for this particular match. Remember, they're a part of that Chicago street fight that's happening at the pay-per-view Sunday. So they mentioned they're both barred. They did not, however, say anything about the remainder of the Nation of Domination, who basically just hung around ringside for the entire match. And the ref did not care. Now, I know we're talking about PG-13 and Clarence Mason, who were effectively flunkies for the group. But if we are trying to follow any kind of continuity here, why were they allowed to be at ringside but Farouk wasn't? I'm just asking. Like Jesse the Body, I'm just asking questions. So they had this match. It began with a jump start on the floor before breaking down into a regular tag match. That was far from the biggest issue here. The biggest problem was that it was Hawk and Animal working a WWF-style match, which never truly played to their strengths and what got them over as a tag team a decade prior. It's a conversation I've had a million times, but baby faces in peril, Road Warriors, it doesn't work. Never has. Anytime there's a Road Warriors match where I have to watch them sell or fight from underneath, it's always awkward. And because they had already brought up the topic of Ahmed and Farouk being barred from ringside, Wrestling Logic 101 dictates incoming fucked finish, which is exactly what we got at the end when Farouk ran out to attack Animal with a nightstick for the DQ. He also jumped Ahmed in the back right beforehand when he was watching with his back turned to a monitor. So now we know why everybody started watching the monitors from the back at an angle years later. It was to avoid getting jumped from behind. See, and we all just thought it was Vince being weird. Turns out there was a purpose to it. So yeah, heels all attack the Road Warriors after the bell. And then Ahmed runs out with a 2x4 for the save. We also saw them nearly decapitate one at PG-13 with the Doomsday. No surprise. It wound up getting the biggest pop in the entire segment. I mean, you can say what you want about this upcoming Chicago street fight. At least it's not Ahmed and Farouk in a singles match, which was most definitely what was being advertised before the return of the Legion of Doom. So thank God they managed to lock those guys down for a contract, because I shudder to think what Ahmed versus Farouk on WrestleMania 13 would have looked like. Probably clunky and stiff. So they, well, from there, they briefly went to ringside before the next match so the announcers could address the potential controversy over the main event. Originally, they said that Bret Hart versus Sycho Sid in the cage this week would be for the WWF title. And now there's a rumor going around that the match is not, in fact, for the title because gossip. I literally have no idea. And the problem was that Gorilla Monsoon wasn't at the building yet to clear up the matter. So we were waiting to hear what the status of the main event cage match would be. I do find that whole thing very humorous. Some unknown source trying to claim or start a rumor that the Bret Sid match would not be for the title, even though they absolutely advertised a title match this week. My first thought was, who's spreading the rumor? Meltzer? Because it would have made perfect sense, knowing his track record. So that brought us to Hunter Hearst Helmsley versus Flash Funk. They officially recognized Chyna on camera by her Christian name this week. She is no longer that bionic-looking woman. I would be remiss, too, if I didn't point out that Chyna's entire upper frame was bigger than Triple H at this point. That includes biceps, triceps, delts, shoulders, and neck. She was quite jacked. More jacked than Hunter, that's for sure. As expected, she interfered on Hunter's behalf multiple times in this match. Funk pretty much destroyed Hunter the entire time until he tried to go up top at the end, but Chyna climbed onto the apron to distract him. Then Hunter just got up, turned Flash around, gave him the pedigree, and got the pin. Flatter than a cheap prostitute's boob job. Just Funk gives Hunter a big move, tries to go up top, Chyna distracts. Hunter gives Funk his finish, and he gets the pin. And then Chyna kicked Funk in the sternum afterward, which apparently was their way of selling the pay-per-view match between Hunter and Goldust in a week. Not the most effective go-home segment for pay-per-view hype, but I mean, this is a week after they had Marlena nearly put Chyna to sleep in the middle of the ring. So maybe I shouldn't look at Gimped Horse in the mouth. At least she got some of her heat back. And then we had a segment straight out of the darkest, deepest crevice of Vince McMahon's anal cavity of bad ideas. I can't even solely put the blame on Russo for this one, because this was 100% a Vince McMahon idea. Every bit of it. I am not making this up. We had Mini Vader and Mini Mankind versus Mini Goldust and Masquerita Sagrada Jr. Well, that one certainly came out of left field, didn't it? Apparently they were short on non-parody gimmicks and said, fuck it, let's throw Masquerita Sagrada Jr. in there. There is a story out there that Jim Cornette has told about the Mini Vader. Without getting too bogged down with details, they apparently shot footage on Shotgun Saturday Night where Cornette and the Mini Vader were paired together to do some bad comedy bit in a bathroom or whatever. I guess the punchline was that the Mini Vader was too short to reach the urinal. Never mind the obvious question of why Jim Cornette had to accompany Mini Vader into a fucking bathroom to begin with. I mean, that's beyond the scope of this pointless conversation. And of course, it's all bad Vince McMahon humor that's purely designed to pop him and nobody else. Because realistically, how could anybody not named Vince McMahon actually laugh at stupid shit like that? But I guess Cornette drew the short end of the stick and ended up getting saddled with having to work with the Minis around this time. Mainly for whatever they were filming for the Shotgun Saturday Night. I have personally never seen the footage, so I can't vouch one way or the other. Actually, now that I go back and recollect the story, I think all the parody gimmicks here were the Lucha guys that Vince had brought in from working the AAA talent exchange deal at the time. So, they have this dumb comedy match, which ends with Masquerita pinning the Mini Mankind. Then they do the angle afterward where Masquerita runs up and does the big stage dive onto the Mini Vader after he was chasing him up the ramp. Now that spot, I have to admit, looked actually really cool. The speed that Masquerita got when he jumped off the stage and landed on Mini Vader, he looked like a literal torpedo flying through the air. Again, though, there really wasn't much of a point to any of it aside from making Vince happy. And to also, I guess, try and give them some material for Shotgun Saturday Night because people were watching that back in the day, apparently. I would have rather been watching weeds grow in the backyard, personally. But I guess there's an audience for everything, right? Some people were amused by watching the Mexican minis do bad comedy bits on a failed WWF secondary program that drew lower ratings than Thunder during the dying days. But what can you do? So that took us to this Bret Hart promo. Before that, actually, we had Gorilla Monsoon making his announcement that the cage match later on is in fact a title match. And to anybody bitching and moaning about The Undertaker getting the short end of the stick just days before his title match in Mania, well, too bad. That was Monsoon's conclusion. He said that Bret has earned this title shot for a while, and even if the timing might not be ideal, it's a title match that's going to happen regardless. So out comes Bret for an interview with Kevin Kelly. And, this is one of those promos where, yeah, Bret said a lot of stuff here. But in the midst of all the verbiage, there's the intonation of his delivery that I think paints the bigger picture. Now, one thing I haven't really talked about in the whole build to the Bret Austin feud and their lead up to the submission match, we keep coming back to the topic of Bret cutting these promos about being screwed left and right, how everybody in the company is conspiring to see him fail, blah, blah. On the one hand, it is most definitely building heavily to Montreal in November, but they're also doing a really good job hinting at the double turn that we're about to see when we get to the Bret Austin match in Mania. Like, especially here when Bret's out there talking about demanding respect, and he's looking over his shoulder at the fans who are already kind of pissing and hawing at him anyway. Bret is showing more and more signs of that heel turn with each passing week. And the great thing about Bret here is that he doesn't really have to try to be condescending or passive-aggressive. Even if you want to argue that he's in the right, because he has been screwed over multiple times, he absolutely has a case for why he should be next in line for a title shot. It's the way he talks about being screwed where you just sit there and think, man, this guy's a fucking whiny-ass pansy, isn't he? I mean, it truly is a great, well-done, organic heel turn. Bret never had to pretend to be a different version of himself. This is the raw, authentic Bret the Hitman Hart you see here. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, and Lord knows I've certainly had my personal opinions about Bret over the years. But he was who he was, man. And he never made any bones about it. We talked here about vowing to win the WWF title later on, and how after he becomes the champion for the 5th time, he'll give The Undertaker his shot just like anybody else that wants to jump in line. And how his focus on Sunday is putting an end to the issues between him and Steve Austin. It's time for Bret to prove yet again why he's the best there is, was, and ever will be. And on the surface, it's a relatively forgettable promo. But especially having seen where it all leads, especially to the end of the show, it's a lot of fantastic foreshadowing in just this little 2-minute bit. And you think about it too, it's a babyface promo in name only, but the patronizing attitude is what gives this a whole different implication. And it's why I've really grown to appreciate Bret Hart over the years. Hated him growing up as a kid. Thought he was boring as piss to watch on television, especially his promos. But after having gone back and seen a lot of this Bret footage over time, man, I really mistook for how talented he was. I still prefer Owen over Bret, But Bret was damn good, man. Really damn good. You know what I didn't mistake, however? It was just how god-awful the Sultan gimmick was. And that's not a knock on Fatu personally, but God, what utter shite that whole thing was. I mean, it's gone to a point now where I'm beyond asking the simple line of questioning such as, have they ever bothered to explain how or when Bob Backlund became a secondary manager when the Sultan was already paired with the Iron Sheik previously? At this point, I'm so fed up with the gimmick, I don't even care. He had a horrible match with some job guy that lasted all of 1 minute and change. Equally as horrible as Rocky Maivio's commentary. It truly is amazing when you go back and look at The Rock in 1997 and think, that same motherfucker would end up becoming one of the household box office attractions over the next 4 to 5 years in this company. With his bland-ass milquetoast commentary that nearly put me into a coma. Yeah, this was about as paint-by-numbers lazy go-home booking as I've ever seen. A short squash with one of the opponents doing superfluous commentary. Also, they can do a brief stare-down afterwards and then cut away before they actually come to blows. And kind of like how they never really explained why Backlund became associated with the Sultan, they also still haven't bothered to explain why Tony Atlas is now all of a sudden managing Rocky going into WrestleMania. Aside from, he and Rock's dad have history as a tag team. With that said, he was still the most visibly jacked guy out of anybody involved here. He had Dwayne's arms from 2024, just, 30 plus years prior. And at least Tony Atlas would be willing to come out and say that he's not all natural. Unlike Dwayne, who still tries to convince everybody that he's all natural. Or at least he was until he dropped all that weight and toned down considerably. Yeah, it doesn't look like that match with Roman is happening anytime soon. So we arrive at the top of the next hour. And here's something I completely wiped from memory. And/or it was so insignificant I neglected to ever remember it happened. Guess who made an oddly convenient return to Monday Night Raw this week, folks? On the go-home show before WrestleMania, no less. Yeah. That fella that was originally supposed to headline against Bret Hart for the title. Some may say the guy who weaseled his way out of having to defend the belt by feigning a knee injury, or better yet, exaggerating said knee injury. Yeah, that guy. He showed up here. And I'm not joking when I say I have zero memory of this promo. This is a complete surprise to me. When I saw Shawn walking through the back in hour 1, I was like, wait, what the hell is Shawn Michaels doing here on Raw? Well, it turns out they wanted to go for some cheap ratings plug. Because if there's one thing we know about Shawn Michaels, especially during his title run last year, he was quite the ratings draw. Yeah, we all know people were flocking to come see Shawn live when he was the champion. So yeah, he shows up here at the top of the hour for an in-ring promo with Vince. And pretty much immediately he drew attention to the fact that the whole losing his smile speech was one big farce. fucking nod and wink inflection he gave off in the camera. He said that he found his smile back home in San Antonio, and now he's bringing that smile everywhere he goes, including TV apparently, now that he got away with not having to do the honors for Bret. And of course, he mentioned the health update on his knee and said he'll be visiting doctors soon to get a prognosis for a return. And when he does come back, he'll be ready to perform. Without his clothes, by the way. He actually suggested that. And then he starts doing the lofty promo about how Vince didn't invite him to be a part of WrestleMania 13, and how he was going to be at ringside to make sure that there were no shenanigans in the WWF title match between Sid and Taker. He also said the following quote, which was not only a slip of the tongue, but it was so bad that even the babyface announcer Jim Ross couldn't help but call him out for it. When he was talking about how he was in the process of building a new home in San Antonio, he said, and I quote, "I've got a lot of face to spill," as opposed to space to fill. The reason it was funny is when you think about the idea of Shawn Michaels, the whole personality, the sexy boy moniker, the idea of him building a home to spill face, there is a sexual connotation in there somewhere. I'm sure all the ladies would have loved some of Shawn's face to spill on their genitalia, if you know what I mean. So we did get some comedy relief here. Then he wrapped up by saying that he's back and he's going to be a part of the WrestleMania package whether we like it or not. And I guarantee there are a lot more people opposed to it than for it. The promo was completely out of left field. I legitimately thought Shawn was gone from TV for like 4 months after that infamous "I lost my smile" speech in February. Like the fact that he made a cameo here and basically undermined everything he said in that promo a month ago makes the whole situation with him and Bret that much more insane. The thing is, I remember Shawn being at WrestleMania, and I vaguely recall him doing commentary of some description. What's weird to me is that they made the decision to have him come out there to say he was going to be on commentary for Taker versus Sid, which, yes, did basically set up their future plans for the Undertaker HBK program, which I still think is some of the best career work Shawn ever did, bar none. But the whole setup of getting to that point was very strange. Like up until a week ago, there was no reason to ever suspect that Shawn would have been a part of that match. But then he came out here this week and was like, "I'm not only inviting myself to WrestleMania, but I'm also interjecting myself in the main event by doing commentary." Which, by the way, apparently Vince and Gorilla Monsoon had no qualms with. The fact that Shawn could just insert himself in a match that he wasn't planned to be a part of. I guess that's okay if you're somebody on the level of Shawn Michaels in the WWF. The whole segment was very bizarre. And to a lesser extent, it pissed me off to see Shawn practically undersell everything about that promo he did a month back. And now he's all peachy and fuzzy because he figured out how to get out of having to job the Bret. So from his standpoint, what does he care, right? I'm sure Bret was in the back wanting to gouge his fucking eyeballs out. Tell you what, I was ready to gouge my eyes out by the time we got to this point in the program. If you already haven't figured it out, this show largely sucked. I know it took me until hour 2 to draw that conclusion. But yeah, on the whole, this go-home show was balls. Also, balls was Vader versus the British Bulldog. Meaning that it was an objectively bad match between two guys that I was actually a fan of. But they just had zero chemistry in the ring together here. The most impressive thing I saw was Bulldog giving Vader a standing vertical suplex before the break spot. That part was cool. The rest of it looked like two guys wrestling in quicksand at a spot show when neither guy wanted to be there. They took turns trading spots at the end. Bulldog made a short, fiery flurry on Vader until Mankind hit the ring to make the save for Vader. And after the heels double-teamed Owen, Bulldog stole the urn from Paul Bear and laid everybody out with it. You know what, though? Out of everything on the show, I will give them this. At least with this fucking feud, I know who the baby faces and heels are. It goes contrary to everything they've been doing and teasing the split between Owen and Davey for the last 8.5 months. But at least I know going into WrestleMania, there is a tag team championship match and I know who the faces are and I know who the heels are. It's not much. But at least I know who the good and bad guys are. So then we had Billy Gunn versus Aaron Ferguson with Ken Shamrock on commentary. And the minute I saw him come down to sit at a ringside, I immediately knew where things were going between him and Billy Gunn. I still have no idea why Billy Gunn is doing the smoking guns gimmick, even after being off of television for a few months nursing an injury, which I almost completely forgot about. He made his return last week, and I never even bothered to mention the whole angle between him and Bart Gunn they shot that never led anywhere. The one where Billy sold having his neck broken. They brought Billy's wife into the ring to make it look like a shoot. Yup. Completely dropped that storyline and never mentioned it again. And so now Billy Gunn is back doing the same old lame gimmick and people still don't give a shit about him. So they had this incredibly boring match while Shamrock talked about the Bret Austin submission match the whole time. And then after Billy won with a cross arm breaker, he went over to confront Shamrock at the commentary booth to challenge him to a fight. That, of course, led to Shamrock humiliating Billy here on multiple occasions. He got him to tap out twice to various submission holds. Then after Billy tried to bring a chair to the ring, he ended up backing down and leaving. So way to go, Billy Gunn. Hard to believe the next gimmick he ended up being saddled with was a terrible Rockstar satire. Then after that, they wanted us to take him seriously when Road Dogg kept calling him Badass Billy Gunn. Ain't nothing badass about anything we saw from him here. He looked like the literal definition of an ass. Just complete and total underneath scrub. And that's me saying that as somebody who actually liked Billy Gunn to a degree. At one point, he was one of my favorite guys to watch on AEW programming. For whatever that's worth. But this was the jobber treatment times 10. The guy just came back from a legitimate injury, and this is what they had him doing on the go-home show before WrestleMania. Being used to put over Ken Shamrock. Not in the traditional sense either, but being used to get over that Shamrock was better at wrestling than him. So that led us to this Austin promo where he called out Shamrock and essentially referred to him as a piece of trash who he could beat the piss out of, no problem. And it's funny, as he was standing there in this pre-tape calling him out, I'm like, did we ever get an Austin versus Shamrock match on pay-per-view in the WWF? Because if we did, I certainly don't ever recall seeing it. But based on the promo we cut here, they were definitely leaning toward the idea that they were going to plan for Shamrock versus Austin at some point. Which made perfect sense when you consider the individuals involved in the direction they were going. They just never followed through. Or if they did, it happened on an In Your House that I don't have any recollection of. I mean, if they were really aiming to draw some money for a Big Four that year, you think about it, it probably should have been Austin versus Shamrock at SummerSlam. Which, of course, would have done away with Austin versus Owen. And we all unfortunately remember how that ended. But with that, let's talk about this cage match between Bret Hart and Sycho Sid for the WWF title. The classic blue cage that the ringside crew had to assemble from scratch. The good old days of WWF. So Bret versus Sid in a cage. Hey, remember when Bret and Diesel had a cage match at an In Your House last year and it was actually a relatively decent match by Kevin Nash standards? Well, this cage match wasn't that. The best part about it was Sid's promo where he vowed that he would powerbomb Bret through the mat and walk out the champion. Which, had that actually happened, wouldn't that mean that Bret would technically win the match because he touched the ground first? If we're going by the laws of physics. I'm just saying. I know Sid wasn't the brightest bulb in the drawer. Bret tried his best here. You all know that I'm a Sid mark through and through, but he was pretty goddamn horrible in this match. Maybe horrible is being too harsh. He was not putting in a concerted amount of effort, which is understandable given that he still had to wrestle on pay-per-view in 6 days. So I'm not blaming him entirely. They had an adequate TV match that just so happened to take place in a cage. The heat here came when Austin ran out to get involved. Because obviously we weren't going to have a cage match without interference. That goes against any logic of why cage matches were designed in the first place. And so, as the match is in progress, we get this comically awkward sequence where Bret, Sid, Austin, and eventually Taker all climb up the side of the cage and start fake fighting. And when I say fake fighting, I mean they were all giving each other the worst faked punches in the history of mankind. And this whole thing went on for a good solid 2 minutes. They're all just hanging at the top of the cage, throwing punches and trying to figure out who's going to land where and how the whole thing's going to get resolved. Eventually, Austin falls to the floor as Bret gives Sid the superplex spot. Then as Taker climbs down the side of the cage, Austin blisters him in the back with a chair, which then leads to Bret trying to leave through the cage door while Sid's climbing up on the other end. But as Bret goes to leave the cage, The Undertaker runs in, and he shoves the door into Bret's face. Yes, not Austin. Taker slams the door into Bret's face. And that is what costs him the match as Sid escapes. So on the one hand, there's your early build to SummerSlam 97, the WWF title match between Bret and Taker. On the other hand, where the fuck did that finish come from? When you really think about it, that spot made virtually no sense. Why did The Undertaker slam the cage door into Bret's head? What the hell did Bret do to cause Taker to want to cost him the match? Aside from Bret making passive comments about Undertaker in his promo earlier, it really did not make any rational sense whatsoever. They're both babyfaces. There's never been any true on-screen beef between them, except for that one promo segment before the In Your House when they were all involved in that four-way. But even then, it wasn't anything astronomical. It was just a very weird ending. Now, it definitely plays into the story that they're telling with Bret getting screwed out of the championship at every turn. I don't know, it kind of seems like they missed a step in between. They went from A to C and completely skipped over B. I mean, the setup to Taker costing Bret the match here, it was completely missing from the equation. And it didn't look accidental, at least in terms of how the spot was executed. This wasn't Austin going to slam the cage door, but then he moved out of the way so Taker was the one who accidentally kicked the cage door instead. No, this was absolutely 100% Undertaker running in to intentionally fuck over Bret. That is what happened. Now, if you want to analyze it deeper, sure, there is an argument to be had that Taker would have wanted to cost Bret the title here because that meant he wouldn't have gotten his shot at Mania. Because Bret's already booked for the submission match with Austin. So had Bret won, that would logically dictate that the match between him and Austin would have been for the title. So I'll grant you that. That would be one possibility. But it doesn't take into account that Taker would have still evidently gotten a title shot regardless. It's like, okay, so it doesn't happen at WrestleMania. Big deal. So he gets his title shot afterward. I don't know. The whole thing was very flimsy. It really did seem like they were looking past both of these programs and already planting the seeds for what would happen after Mania season. Which on the one hand, I have no issues with. Like teasing feuds and programs, that's definitely admirable booking strategy. Especially when you're only in the early development stages. But there's also completely discounting what's going on in the present. Which is kind of what they were doing here. It's like before we saw the two big blow-offs, they were already looking ahead at the next big summer feud. But again, the whole conversation goes back to Bret getting fucked over. And at least they've been consistent in that department. There were some good things here, but by and large, the execution of the match itself, again, very rushed and very chaotically put together. That said, at least the closing 10 minutes of the show didn't suck. Remember that compliment sandwich analogy I used earlier? This is where I come back to saying some good things about Raw this week. Because as painfully bad as a lot of the previous hour and 20 minutes was, this closing segment with Bret, Austin, Taker, and Sid was fucking great. And let me start by saying, I'm usually not a big fan of over-exaggerated profanity in wrestling, especially when it comes off forced and fake. Like it's guys using the F-bomb and dropping goddamn just to say it, as opposed to it coming from any real source of anger or frustration. Bret's promo here was absolutely a case where profanity was perfectly suited. When he snatched that mic from Vince's hand and shoved him down, started ripping into how the whole goddamn thing was a joke, how everyone in the locker room and everybody in the building knows that he should be WWF champion right now, and if they don't like it, tough shit. This is really good. Because even if you want to suggest that Bret was in working mode through all of this, there was a piece to this promo where you could really sense that Bret's real anger was coming out when he was delivering it. And part of it might have been him venting some real frustrations about the Shawn Michaels thing, which may be conspiratorial, also not completely irrational. I just believed so much of what Bret was ranting about here because it sounded exactly the way you would picture somebody being really pissed off sounding like. Certainly more believable than the overly scripted bullshit you get today, where everybody just sounds like overly rehearsed NPCs talking into a camera. The great thing about the way they structured this too, Bret was still in the middle of his promo as they were tearing down the cage. So if you're thinking about how this would go down in the real world, like him doing this promo while they were still in the process of taking down the cage, it made perfect sense. Because obviously Bret wasn't going to wait for them to tear the fucking cage down before he started raging. No, he's pissed. He's mad. He's got some shit to say and he's going to say it right now. And I love the visual shots of him and Vince where, Bret's calling him out at ringside, and they go to do the shot of Vince's face where you see him scowling and looking up at Bret with total disdain. Oh, such good television, dude. And like the whole angle where Sid comes out and gets into the fight with Bret, and Taker and Austin eventually get involved. And it all segued perfectly into Taker and Sid going at it while you had Austin and Bret brawling on the floor. So even in them merging the two big feuds together at the end, they still brought it back full circle and put the focus on the guys that are fighting each other at the pay-per-view on Sunday. So I really loved everything about the closing 10 minutes. It was excellent programming. Really great ending to the show before they cut the feed, which was desperately needed. It was a rough pathway to get to those closing several minutes, but at least they ended on a high note. As an overall go-home show, it was still pretty damn rotten. And honestly, it really shouldn't be all that shocking when you look back at WrestleMania 13 as a whole. Outside Bret versus Austin, there really is nothing substantial on that card that sticks out. I mean, even Taker versus Sid for the title was a completely forgettable match in the grand scheme of things. I love that submission match. But after we review the pay-per-view next week, to be honest, I probably won't ever look back and think about WrestleMania 13 after the fact. It's just not a great show. Even though the WWF was doing a lot of things to try to catch up with the times, they still hadn't quite figured out the ideal pay-per-view model yet. 1997 was where they had just started to figure things out. But I don't think it was truly until post-SummerSlam where they actually figured out their winning formula. Because the fall of 97 is great. But everything prior is dicey. But that'll be on the agenda for next week. WrestleMania 13. And if I have time, I might try to do Retro Raw afterward, but I'm not guaranteeing anything. So, there you go. I just gave an artificial thumbs up, but then I remembered it's an audio podcast, so nobody's going to see anything. Gotta love stupidity. Anyway, thanks for everybody for watching the show. I will be back this coming Friday for WCW in Mid-South. And I did look ahead this time. There is a TBS Superstation show to recap. So look forward to that. Have that bell icon turned on so you know when all our shows go up. And I'll catch you guys later this week. Take care. Peace out.